Good morning. I think one of the big problems in today's sort of in the way we deal with meaning these days is we're very literal. We're very much about, you know, word for word, letter for letter. Um, and well, it's like, you know, this is part of, what makes AI so frustrating these days is that an AI can step in and after somebody feeds it a prompt, kind of just make a nice little essay and I've seen folks kind of use it the way a I've seen folks kind of use it the way just as a way to settle arguments. They'll kind of you know put it in, they'll go to the AI, have the AI list out the reasons, and then offer that. But even before then, you can tell, the way that folks will tend to use tropes in general. Like, okay, I want dramatic stuff, so I'm going to have somebody die. It's like you look at X-Men 2. Spoilers uh, for a over 20-year-old movie. Jean Grey dies at the end, or appears to die in the end, as a huge flood from a burst dam swamps her. Uh, and this was a profound, painful, dramatic ending. But somebody took the cue that was what made the movie so dramatic, and decided that the next movie, three or four characters would die, uh, and not necessarily before the end. And, and did that make the movie more profound? Not at all. In fact, it's one of the less admired of the movies for a number of reasons. People have this tendency to kind of treat it as if certain subjects are inherently profound, inherently artistic, and they're not. They're not. You know, there is a hacky, stupid way to deal with death, as there is a hacky, stupid way to deal with any subject. I mean, there are subjects where it's relatively easy to provoke an emotional response. Um, and then there's a subject where it's, you have to take a lot more sort of nuance to actually make it work. I'll tell you this: if you're looking at any sort of story, um, if you're looking at any kind of story, I think you're going to see that any rule you could set up and say, "Oh, this couldn't possibly be funny," you know, and there's actually a way to make that funny, or this couldn't possibly be sad. You couldn't possibly have that sort of feelings for this kind of character. And the answer is no, that's not true. There are more difficult targets, mind you, but anytime somebody is making such a pronouncement, anytime somebody's trying to act as if it somehow breaks some rule to have it meaningful to an audience. I mean, you can have a comedy or a dramatic film of some kind. Um, you can have that where just nothing happens, where there really is no plot. But you're going to have to do a lot to keep people's interest. The the title of of this podcast entry, the title is a basically. I'm not saying that you can't be profound yourself. I'm just saying it's the wrong attitude to take. That the profundity of something is not a function of the subject. It's more of a function, I think. Well, it's not a function of anything per se. To say it's a function of this, the function of that, is to imply that there's an automatic nature to it. And I would say that's wrong. Um, what would I say? I would say that you need to be telling you need to be, I mean, there's generality, there's sort of a general, you know, when we look at things, when we look at the information about things, we can look at the generality of it, the generalizations we can make about it and what, what things are interesting in that. We can look at the minutia of it, or we could also look in the middle scale and see what's intriguing there. But anytime you're making any kind of story and you want people to be drawn in, you want people to be kind of, you know, become interested in the subject, I think it helps to realize that human minds often work in a process. They are like they do things. People who are thinking about things are doing something. with what they are being handed. And so rather than think of it in terms of, low this, I mean, let's take an example here. What do you think is in this bottle? Is it some, what do you think? I'm deliberately using my fingers to cover this up. I could tell you any number of things might be in this. I could tell you that there is a miracle cure in it. I could tell you that it's just water, which is close to the truth, but not the complete truth. Saline nasal spray. But for a moment there, you were wondering, okay, what is this? You might, if you're if you're relatively astute about certain things, or if you recognize the shape, you might have figured this out before I told you. But this is part of the way. This is part of the thing. Um, Modern marketing culture. It's not necessarily. It's very skilled at getting your attention, but I don't think it is as much of a common skill of what to do once you have that attention. People are too, it's a lot easier to measure, do we have people's attention? Have we been noticed? And in a sort of odd way, marketing and other things are sort of in a what I would call a 2-year-old sort of sphere of mind that any attention is good attention. You know, yell, scream, run around naked. You know, if I got your attention, that's I've done what I came here to do. And don't worry, folks, I'm not going to do that. I am beyond such things as a grown-up adult. Well, maybe, but okay. But still, they're thinking about getting your attention. But when you're telling a person a story, getting people's attention is just the first step. It's retaining that attention. Uh, that's it's conducting that attention, conducting that observation through the message that as things go along. That I think is where we really can get into profundity. What is it to say something's profound? It's to say, well, insightful. It's to say inspirational. It's to say that you go from, you know, starting out things saying, I I believe I know this already, to going, I did not know that, or I did not understand things that way. For something to be truly profound, or to elicit any other sort of really um, great emotional response for somebody to be moved, for somebody to be led to laugh, or any other sort of response, I think you need to take somebody somewhere. Development, basically. A good joke is developed. I mean, even if you're doing the smallest sort of development, the last man on earth sat down to eat his meal and there was a knock at the door. Shortest horror story possible, I guess. But still, it's a process. You establish something and then you pose something that changes that something. He's the last man on earth, but he's not alone. Even that sentence, he's the last man on earth, but he's not alone. Within that sentence, you have told a story. Of course, if everybody does that, it kind of the salt loses its savor, to use biblical terms. It's so. I guess what I'm trying to say is, um, it's a process, and it's important to realize that you're. And first of all, don't try to be profound. I would say that's like trying to smile. If you just fake a smile, people can tell the difference. People can tell the difference between something that has genuine emotion behind it and something that's just "Mm, I'm just doing this so that I don't seem rude while I ignore you in the midst of the conversation." uh, you know, People can tell the difference between somebody who is genuinely expressing an emotion and somebody who's not. I mean, some more than others. I'm one of those who's less capable in that regard. But even I can kind of get the sense that people might be lying to me. For example, if I start catching a number of false facts in what they're telling me, if I start, you know, getting a number of suspicious signals, if they start, um, it's like with phishing emails. That's phishing, as in emails that are sent to you trying to get you to do something, trying to get you to log in somewhere so that so that people can manipulate you into doing something or get you to sort of share your credentials. Um, it's like you're it's like they're wanting to compel you. And what they're often going to do is they're going to kind of say, there's this urgent thing happening, and if you don't do what we want you to do, what we're telling you to do, bad consequences will result. And while those things do, you do get your disconnection notices, you do get your, oh no, sort of, we've, denied you financing here, or that's, or we've turned you down for the credit card that we told you you were pre-approved for. It's sort of like, at a certain point, you know when people are misleading. So what was I starting this sort of digression off of? Well, but it's sort of it's a as you take somebody through a story, it's very easy to fall into the trap of sort of having a what you intend to communicate in mind and strongly in mind, and then fix that's what I'm actually communicating. And but when you do sort of uh finally sort of have the work laid out before you, you might realize that very little of the story you intended to tell actually means what you wanted it to mean. You can want to be, a, I mean, it's sort of like this. I can, it's very hard to get to create a moving statue, but it's not unheard of course, to have a statue that's say like running in mid stride to make it look like it's doing that. It takes some artistry to do that, but it's entirely possible to use a medium in order to create a an impression of something that the medium cannot literally show. You can have motion in still images. You can have stillness. Well, no, you can have you can give an impression of a great stench or a sort of a tactile sense of things in a visual medium. You can make food look delicious. You can make a meal sound delicious over a radio show. Just this. You can describe things and then get people's taste buds watering. Meaning is not Meaning is often a thing of reference. It's often something you kind of point your way towards rather than actually directly um, portray. You know, you can show, for example, a let me set the scene. A man is walking through an alien spaceship, and there are all sorts of greasy, nasty little, you know, biomechanical, glistening tubes all over the place. And he's stepping along, and all of a sudden, he, the shot is we see that person suddenly pause and we're just focused on his face. We're not showing anything else, you know, besides a little background. Now, the visual is just going to be he pauses, he looks down, and then carefully he walks forward while having this sort of look of utter disgust in his face, wincing and ow. And we might later show a picture of him, kind of just wiping his boots off. But what we're going to use in order to suggest what we didn't show is sort of an eggshell, slimy, crunchy sound, you know. And we're going to introduce this with the first sort of, looks down and is disgusted sort of thing. So, we're going to hear scratch, 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 and as we go on, we might even have some sort of other sort of slimy sounds go on until the guy is out of this particular section. Now, we could do this we could do a practical sort of thing showing this sort of disgusting event, and we can add to that. In fact, we can use this first part of the um, sort of sound effects to kind of suggest what's going on before we get to the visuals of what he's actually stepping through. But what we're doing starting out, we could in fact just keep on doing that and only later show what kind of foulness has squished itself onto the boots. And we can do that and save some money on actually doing the practical setup there. But what I've described to you is sort of the power of suggestion. And it's what we can kind of use to prompt a response. Because what people need isn't necessarily the explicit information. We are not computers that always need the explicit information. We are human beings who were kind of tuned to attend to new things by partial information. So the noise, the response of the person, we're attuned to how other people respond to other things. Yeah. Yeah, like if you have some sort of let's say you have a person who has been telling the other characters all along how much they really want to how much they really want to get back with and meet with this other person who is safeguarded in some sort of fort or whatever, or at some sort of space station. And we go through all this trouble, and they finally arrive, and these two characters finally see each other. And there's any number of ways we can play this. We could have one character, the other character, react with an "oh no" look, even as the character we've been with smiles and goes "hi," and that can indicate potentially that the person who we thought would be, you know, just gloriously overjoyed to see this person who's been looking for them that they didn't necessarily want to see this other person again. Could be an abusive boyfriend, husband. It could be a relative who raised them and abused them. It could be an ex. You know, it could be some sort of evil alien or wizard or whatever. It could also go the other way, that the person is happy to see the the character in question, the character who we've been with, who's been talking about how they uh, really wanted to see this person again. And our cue to this person being not necessarily who they claim to be, or maybe not the telling us the truth the whole time, might be that this character, when they see the other person, their face is grim, or that that there that there is some conflict in how they present themselves and how they actually how they respond to this other person. Or you could, or are there a number of ways to develop this? But one way or another, you're it's the route you take people down that is often important. What you refer to is often as important as what you literally portray. Again, as I describe the crunching steps, or as I describe uh, this person meeting this, and what I'm picturing is an older gentleman, and the person they're meeting is a younger, sort of maybe teenage girl. Um, the look on their faces tells us something about what's really going on. And that's the thing. A lot of what we do in terms of art, it's not closed off within its own sort of sphere. It's often reaches off the screen in whatever direction, in dimensions we don't have exact measurements for. Back, the we can imagine things beyond the frame. We can imagine, oh, there's this nasty sick stuff that he's having to step through, but we don't actually have to see what he's stepping through. We can just hear it. We can just see it in his face that it's nasty stuff. We can even get, we can even get a sense that there's an overpowering stench in the oh, oh, you know, you it, the, the performance of the actor. This is one of the reasons why actors' performances are so important, because they can add dimensions to the audience's experience of the world around them, because they are. our analogs. We are watching them to see, okay, what's going on in this world. We watch other people to figure out what's going on around us or what could be going on in a place we can't directly or locally observe. You know, it's signs of things beyond what we see. But we can also apply this you know, to ideas. We can have characters sort of work their way towards an idea in how they say something. And it's not that, eh, but if you start out from the idea that this is profound, that things are inherently profound, that things are inherently meaningful, you're going to get sort of stuck, just trying to directly present a symbol, directly present something to your audience. Um, you're going to get stuck trying to make that seem meaningful, but you're not actually going to make people feel that what they're seeing is meaningful. You are developing things, you are elaborating things. And even in a medium which is which is as vivid and literal as the um, as film and modern electronic cinema, even in those sorts of things, it's important to learn that s- that sense of being able to imply beyond what is just immediately in frame. There's a world the characters inhabit often enough. There is a world that what's going on in the shot is occurring within. And part of the art of what we do is to give people a sense of things beyond simply what's in front of them. I know I'm I mean, you see in a lot of this is, I think, the difference between a truly good um, filmmaker like a Spielberg or you know Brian Singer versus Brett Ratner. You see many of our best sort of franchises were put together by people who started things out in a sort of an indie cinema sort of way. And that's not to say that indie cinema is somehow superior, that everybody who does work in that is good. That's not what I mean. But it's to say that a lot of the folks who were plucked up to do greater things, like for example Brian Singer. Brian Singer starts out with the usual suspects. That's what gets him his greater career later down the line. You know, and the usual suspects is not a science fiction film. It's not a fantasy film. It's not a comic book movie, although it does have some pulp aspects to it. But you can see in Singer's use of images, of imagery, of sound, of music, that he's not just simply thinking in terms of um, that there is more to his thinking about these things than just simply um, do I have the shot? Do I have the characters in frame? There's a meaning to how he stages things. There's a meaning to how he does the mise en scène. There is, he doesn't simply, he's not, the modern system is fixated on literalism because you can pipe that down a internet connection. You can pipe that down literal content. It also, it's easier to critique. It's easier to, for untrained people to, do their cinema sin, the cinema win sort of appreciation of its superficial. If you, the superficiality is easy. You can pump out content endlessly if all you want to do is just, you know, check off a series of boxes. But if you want to do something that is more meaningful, you really have to, um, you really have to step beyond that. You have to start thinking about what it is you want to portray or refer to. What it is, how you want to lead people to that. How do I want to lead people to, like, for example, in that scene that I described, that hypothetical scene where the guy's stepping through a nasty sort of stretch of, I don't know, small, you know, insect eggs or something like that. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Yeah, I mean, you can even probably imagine it as I say it, but I'm drawing your attention in the visualization that I'm giving you, in the shots that I describe. I'm drawing your attention to the person's response. And then I'm using the sound effects to kind of tell us what the visuals aren't necessarily going to tell us. And because your imagination can come up with a lot worse than, especially if I if I put some interesting little sound effect nuances in there, like an extended sucking sound associated with a difficult move of the boot. It kind of, I can give you an experience that was unexpected, that you weren't necessarily set for going in. And I think that's one of the important things here. If you get any sort of message from what I'm trying to say, it's, you wanna go somewhere with it. You wanna, you know land. I mean, you want to land a punchline. You want to put a nice button on it. You want it to mean something. So the way we convey meaning, it's not just you know, instant portrayal of literal things. Or if you're writing, it's not just, describe this, describe that, describe this, dialogue, dialogue. You're not just simply a machine for, creating a story. You are somebody who can experience things in your own head as you prepare things for others to experience. And you can kind of go back a little bit later and say, okay, does it actually create the sort of does it actually create the sort of impression I was aiming to in the first place? Does it come across? Meaning and the communication of meaning ultimately is a process, not just a literal transfer of data. And I guess that's going to be the note that I leave you with. Uh, you all have a good morning and a good day.